Welcome to Mastery Mental Rehearsal Series. Today I'm introducing deep practice as the methodology that not opens the door to the best version of yourself, but gives you the skills to walk through it. For most of our lives, we're operating inside an upward era. Disruption happened, but it tended to revert to the mean. You could afford active. You could afford to wait. You could afford to treat preparation as optional because the system itself did a lot of the stabilizing for you. That assumption no longer holds. We're now in a complexity is increasing faster than most people's internal models can keep up with. And that's true. You're looking at markets, technology, organizations, or your own career trajectory. When the mean itself is moving, activity isn't neutral anymore. It quietly pushes you off course. That's where agency and personal leading abstract ideas start becoming practical necessities. Today's topic is about mental rehearsal, but not in the way it's commonly understood. Not visualization thinking, not imagining outcomes and hoping confidence follows. I want to talk about deep practice as true mental rehearsal, the kind that rewires what shows up hits. You might assume deep practice is just another familiar idea with a new label, something that's been around forever. It is practices directly tied to neuroscience findings that have emerged only in the last few decades. Now, that may sound like plenty of time for something to become main until you put it in context. The human brain has been evolving for over 100,000 years. Our modern understanding of how performance is shaped in the nervous system, particularly the role of myelin wrapping neural pathways, is less than a century old. In evolutionary terms, that's not even early childhood. The research is moving fast, but much of it is still in the labs. It hasn't fully made its way in textbooks, school curricula, development. Yet, it already explains something most of us have been experienced firsthand. Under pressure, we don't rise to our intent. We fall back to what's why. Deep practice is different because it focuses on wiring. It's not about visualization or insight. It's about deliberately training the nervous system so that when the moment arrives, something new actually shows up, something aligned with your quest. What most people call muscle memory isn't stored in the muscles at all. It's nervous system memory. It's myelination of neural pathways, process elite athletes use to perform under speed, uncertainty, and opposition is available for skills. Decision making, emotional regulation, communication, leadership. The test of whether rehearsal worked is simple. When stress shows up, do you revert to something new appear? Deep practice is the methodology that changes that answer. It's how focus and engage becomes the instead of fight or flight. Preparation stops being theoretical and starts being embodied. My focus today is about reframing mental rehearsal, not as motivation. So what I do is talk about a concept. I drew the picture yesterday, and in that in that illustration, what I did was drew this diagram. Let's pull up that screen. I talked about what it looks like when we hit a crisis. So if you're moving along, you have this model of the world that's in between an upper limit and a lower limit. It's a model, if you will, and I would argue that model is not optimized. This model, well, let me back up. It's optimized based on your 0 to 7 conditioning. It's not optimized if your purpose or your quest is big. When I'm talking big, I'm talking 10x. When I work with the client, we first look at their quest is, want to have support in the first place. And then if we can't 3 to 10x that, it's not really worth them spending money for an engagement. I can point them to some videos, some books, and give a high level plan and let them execute on that plan. When they get and see that 10x is possible, that's when we come in, because that's where you need an optimized model. Your current model is good enough to get you through this crisis. That's what I drew yesterday. And this crisis could be a real crisis or it could be an opportunity. Either way, it takes the same skills. And coming out of that crisis, we may level up with the continued model. We may reduce and struggle to get back on track. Or what usually happens is we pick up right with this, doing the same, more of the same. 95% of everything we do is done by habit. This is called homeostasis. This process, the brain is always efficient. Homeostasis is like a status quo. What we're talking about is something different. What I want to do is go from, and not a crisis, it's that shift, inflection point that and you start moving up. It's this inflection point that not only moves up, but keep moving up. And in using the good to model, what good to great talked about is when he looked at those companies that made that shift, he wanted to see that they held it, made the inflection point, and held that upward trajectory for at least years before they made cut to good to great. And then great by choice, he companies that had made that cut and were in good to great, and in the 2008 financial crisis, they fell off. Or the ones that didn't fall off. So many of those good to great companies did after 2008. They weren't still there. He looked at the ones that were there, and that's where the book Good to Great by Choice came from. And so I use that when we're working with leadership, which I'll start next week, which I talk about as one-to-one. Even though they may have 12 people, you're still leading one-to-one at some level. Use in the leadership models, use good to great, great by choice, and multiplies. Why? These three books have extensive research. They equate to what I call near principles. There's no organization I work with, I'm certainly not going to do it, replicate the amount of research, thousands and thousands of hours of interviews and reams and reams of data looking at public companies. I don't need to recreate. It's enough. And the current organizations are so far from that, because many organizations, instead of working with best practices, the way a sports team statistics and the high percentage plays, too many organizations use a leadership model that was based on preferences, maybe what made the owner feel comfortable, maybe what a charismatic leader decides is the way to go, and everybody just lines up behind, because the bar for world class is so low when it comes to leadership. And why is it so low? Because there's the face every single time, take down every play the way it is in a sport. So when you're looking at an Olympian, you know that they're competing against the best of the best of the best, that their techniques have to be the best of the best, because they're fighting against, while it might be a direct opponent in their face, there's a clock or there's some measure. But in sports teams, stop you every play, and they've studied you. They've studied your game. They know what you're going to do, and they're coming at you with everything. And that raised team to a level where what they do is world class. Only the best of the best of the best makes it into the playbook. And that's what's missing for leadership. And that's those three books as a basis. And until we come up with something better, until there's more research, which there will be, then we'll use that. But for right now, those three books, if you do what those, that I use those books to build high performing teams. Not great by choice because it wasn't out yet, but great. And while I didn't have the benefit of multipliers, we used practices that were coming up from using neuro-linguistic programming, excellence, passion for excellence, the seven habits of highly effective people, which are similar. Theory is foundational for all of those. So it's, if you understood self-determination theory, and you put everything through a lens of autonomy, competentness, you would make far many more great decisions in terms of ship organization development than you have been. And I don't know who you are, so obviously that's a hyperbolic statement, but the point is self-determination theory, understanding it through the lens of autonomy, relatedness, it checks all the boxes. It fits all of that, but it's theory. And what we want to do and what we're doing in dynamic leadership is I'm talking about what's happening in February, which is one-to-one leadership, and then what's happening in March is one-to-many leadership. So what we're talking about is we're going along in this thing, and then we're breaking. And when we break out, something happens. We run into this barrier, and this barrier has stories, beliefs, habits, fears, experiences, good experiences. And the reason I say good experiences is because sometimes a person has so much success at a particular thing that they won't try anything else. That's all it is. Bad experiences. Sometimes there's so much of a fear of something because they don't ever want that pain. Sometimes it's just the belief that they've tried everything, that there's nothing possible, that it's just not available to them. And what we're doing is breaking through this. Of course, this line will have a little bit of back and forth. If you stick with it and you fight off the I don't want powers and the stories, and you work through. And this part here may take 3 to 6 months, but once you break through and you're on this upward trajectory, you have a new problem. And the new problem is your model that worked down here doesn't work up here. You need a new model. But the thing is, what worked down here was based on conditioning, and it's guided you. And I talk to sometimes a client will say something like, "How can I let that go? That's me. That's what made me successful. That's how I survived. I used that, and it's hard to let it go. And you need it up here." So I would argue people's model is not optimized for their purpose or their quest, and it's not. It's what it is. It's because this was conditioned from 0 to 7 is a different model of the world. You optimize your model for your quest. This is what you're getting able to function here, and you have to do this with principles because you don't have the habits. What we can do is we can create principles using deep practice to make those behaviors that are aligned with the principles like I talked about. And you could use 7 Habits of Effective People at the individual level. But the thing is, the good to great principles also apply because everything is fractal. The internal parts of an organization are the people, and the internal people are ourselves. And if you look at this across it all, it's very fractal. Once you understand the principles, it's a lot easier to drive to your results. Now, I want to use it up because I talked about things that you realize. That statement has been used for so long. I don't think people realize how significant this is. Look at Ray Dalio's book, Changing World Order. He has this kind of diagram on the front of the book, the cover. And this is these are 80-year cycles roughly. Figure 82, let's call it 70 to 100, but roughly 80 years. And it turns out the world superpowers, and one rises and then falls, one rises and then falls. And he went back and looked hundreds of years. And before you had the global view, he looked at the empires because it followed the same pattern where again, it's fractal. All of it's like the same kind of stuff. And he applied it, and he used, because he was wealth management, he was had a management firm, Bridgewater, and he used it to help him understand what was going on in global market. That proved its success, and he built his business around that. He's one of the most recognized uh, money managers, wealth managers, because of the consistency success. So this is the U.S., and the reserve currency is the U.S. dollar. Before the U.S. was the superpower, it was Great Britain, and the reserve currency was the pound sterling. Before that, it was, and the currency was, before that, it was Spain and Portugal, and the currency was the Spanish pesos. The point being, the two go hand in hand. If you look at what's going on right now here, stage 5 in a six stages. So when we were going up, all you had to do was show up, and even up here, all you had to do was show up. Here, if you just hung out long enough, things got better. But now we're here, and you have all sorts of actors. You have people running into, and you have people with a lot of power fearing. They've got billions and billions of dollars, but they might lose some of it because they just have never, and it's scary for them. So you have power plays going on, you have money plays going on. I'm seeing some of the worst examples in these ads that are touting like financial trading with ideas that were rampant in the early 2000s, and to the fact that you can't trade like that anymore. But these ads are selling people on, and people are spending money thinking they can be a day trader in this. And yeah, you can have some successes, but the computation in the 90s, the Wall Street firm hiring mathematicians in the early 2000s. After that, they were hiring computer scientists. There's so much computational power, and consider how ChatGPT is. You put in a complex prompt, and it's giving you a, a massive answer, and sometimes what's holding it back is how fast it could populate the screen. Consider that's what you're up against when you're trading. Just think about it. I saw a ad that pops YouTube sometimes, and it says that we're using artificial intelligence to tell you where XYZ stock will close tomorrow. And it's the same ad running over and over and over where it's going to land. This reminds me of a newsletter strategy that was used in the, I think it was late 90s, and they sent out stock predictions, 4 different stock predictions to a massive audience using email. And then when it happened, either true or false, the people who got a prediction that turned out to be true, those got another one. And then of that group, the ones that got a prediction that was true, they got another one. So now there's 3. And remember, confirmation bias says that if you hear 3 things that are undeniably true, you automatically believe the 4th one from that source. That source becomes uber credible. That they've had 3 experiences that worked, the prediction worked. Guess what? That group gets an offer, a greatly discounted offer, $100,000 newsletter for just $25,000. And people buy that newsletter. Bias was used to trick them into buying it. This is bad because it's gotten worse, and it's to the point where like it's okay to lie to people. And in the 50s, with that example that brought up in every business marketing course I've ever taken, and that's the guy in the 50s who decided to add a line on shampoo that says rinse and repeat, and their market share. Why did it double? Because they started using up more shampoo because they were rinsing and repeating. Before that, you didn't have to rinse and repeat. You still don't. But because when you rinse and then you get more suds the second time, feel like, yeah, this is really working. That's brought up in marketing classes, everyone I've been in, and telling marketing people is that it's okay to stretch the truth. It's okay to trick the public. And, and we're living in a now 50 years later rampant. So this whole thing that's going on where you have people with money and power driving conversation with and driving behavior and funding things to preserve their position, their wealth. And I mean, I could go into it, but hopefully you get the point. If you take out everything I just said and you accept the fact that we're in an 80-year that started in 1944 and we're in the decline part of it now, and that China is the emerging new world superpower. So we don't know what's going to happen. We don't know what China's going to do, and we don't really know what the U.S. is going to do. All intents and everything at says that there's this multipolar thing going. NATO collapsing. Potentially, you see the continent of Africa. Many of the countries are starting to mine and process their own gold. So they're going from getting 10 cents on the or for the gold that was found, and sometimes buying back some of the resources after they turned into products. You see Africa now, the countries are now processing their own resources. And because they have so much gold, that there's also, and you have gold, you can see this shift from fiat currency to gold standard. With fiat currency, the power can just print more money. They can just keep printing money. And that printing enables them to do a lot of things. That's why the U.S. is in debt, because they've been able to print money and it's not stopping. So we don't know. We do know that people are creative and innovative, and people have a mentality that's going to prevail. So I do believe that there could be a multipolar future, and that multipolar future could include some other country or some other set of countries yet to be defined. Just like Ottoman Empire, which was before, there were multiple in the superpower. In this superpower, we had Spain and Portugal shared it. We could see polar. It makes sense because we already have Britain as a currency, and it's not just uh, the India, China, and South Africa. Other countries have joined in on BRICS. Then you have crypto, which is expanding. So what happened in terms of the new reserve currency? We don't know what that looks like. But again, you have your own model. I really recommend that they use as here's my narrative of what I think is going in the future. Whatever it is, it has to include that thing. If you did nothing else but look at the technology curve, part of the technology curve, up. This started in 1970, where they said it was doubling every 18 months, capacity, capability, and on and on an exponential curve. So doubling 30 times. And this is why you have artificial intelligence facing the old guard artificial intelligence at a mere fraction, single digit percentage fraction of the cost of the first AIs. I mean, I could go on and on. And you know what the thing is, there is a reversion to the mean, but the problem is, and so you're not fear mongering. This is not about, oh my gosh, no, there's always a way. There's always something you haven't used. The example in 1970s in the gas crisis, the engineers, the scientists, they raised the flag and said, we're run out of oil by middle of 1990. Well, cars were 12 miles to a gallon. And that prediction forecast did not contemplate that they put computers in cars. See, at that time, cars were on carburetors, not fuel injection. They didn't think there would be cars. They didn't think there would be turbochargers. Powerful cars can get 25, 30 miles to a gallon. They didn't think that it would use fracking. They didn't think they would use offshore drilling. So the point is, there was a forecast that was scary, turned out to not even be true. Now we find Venezuela has 300 billion barrels underground. And it's more than that once they start digging and fracking, and because they're doing this analysis without actually digging into it. It's like a tip of an iceberg. Yeah, the tip is maybe 300 billion, but what does the iceberg look like? So this is the backdrop. Now, using that, if nothing else, hopefully what we've done is paint a picture that, one, things are changing very fast. Two, we have natural resistance because our models that we use are not optimized for our purpose, our quest, and for the future, for all this kind of change going on. And three, that deep practice is a way through this. So that part you have to take forward until you hear what I have to say. I encourage you to do your own homework. I said deep practice is not just another term. It's not just a fancy way of saying practice. It's really different. It's aligned with neuroscience. Myelin wasn't even really understood until after 1950. It was all just be inert matter that showed up, right? But then they find out that the more myelin is on a neural pathway or a neuron, the more and stronger that particular neuron fires. And because of that faster, stronger, more accurate, you're able to perform at a high level if you're an athlete. But if you're for everyday life, moves everything because the same neural pathways that are used to develop memory, it's actually nervous system memory. Those are the same ones in our cognitive process, the same ones that are used in our speaking. It's why salespeople, the top salespeople, ever since I've been looking at this, about they practice their presentation out loud. And it's hard to understand why that would make a difference. People practice it in their head, which is not a good practice, but practice it out loud to activating neurons. That's why I go live. I go live every day. I started in November to March. I go live I started going live on 2 years ago during the week. It was so beneficial, which is why I decided to go live daily. But think about what I'm doing as you hear about neurons. I'm putting so on the physical side, I use seven factors that drive neurotransmitter activation and high performance, sprinting, anything like that, to activate neurotransmitter. But those seven factors are novelty, something new, intention. You have to have a purpose, a reason, to focus. You have to have balance or complexity. Those are interchangeably. Balance for physical, complexity for cognitive. And then we have explosiveness or intensity bursts. Explosive would be for physical, intensity bursts or bursts of intensity where you 5 minutes and then struggle at the edge of ability. So that's seven of them. And those are used to myelin. That's what we use to build myelin and activate neural pathways. This is very similar. And that's why I go speaking. I've got them all. Novelty, new day, but it's related to my quest. Intent. I do have an intention of what I want to do. I have slides. I've got drawings. I have to decide and make what I want to do. Every single day, I have the precision. I'm drawing these pictures, and I get more and more each time I do it. I do research. If there's a part that I feel like I didn't really say that right, I go by it. The complexity. I'm relating many things that are unrelated. You can't do this with artificial intelligence because I'm relating the unrelated. Because of the way large language models are built, they can't relate the unrelated because they don't know what's unrelated. They do, they're hallucinating. It's not targeted. And then you have the progression. So I'm constantly adding more things on it. And the intensity bursts, while going live for 45 minutes, is an intensity up the game. So, for example, uh, I just add more intensity either with timing or with different media or by boxing myself in with less time to prepare. Struggle at the edge of ability. So all the time you're speaking is struggling at the edge of ability. On Monday, my audio went out. There was something wrong with the app. And I knew something was off because my imaging was very, very narrow, my image. And turns out the audio had cut out. And you just deal with that. Other times I may say wrong. You have to fix it in post. Anyway, I say all that to say, if you are a sales trainer, make sure you have people do role play out loud, this inside your head is not the same. It's good, but it's the same. And if you are a person who goes live or who speaks in front of the camera, go live a few times. I have multiple Facebook platforms. I go live. And and then I practice and I pull things together. You'll find that it changes. It changes. Find your voice. You are working speaking. You're and familiar to Bennett back in the I ran a guy or found out about this guy in the late 70s, early 80s, public speaking coach, and he used to say he called it 30-10 formula, 30 minutes reading every day about what your quest is, your business, what he talked about, reading about it or inspirational material, and 10 minutes reading out loud. And that was to become a better speaker. Well, I'm essentially doing that. I'm doing 45 minutes talking about and the thing that's important, and 45 minutes speaking out loud. So that was a lot. Now we're going to go and look at the deep practice. And feel free to take screenshots on this. I'm going to go pretty quickly because I have a workshop, by the way, that I'll talk about at the end where we do the practicing. So this feels like theory, but it's all practice. Is that we use examples and literally work exercises so that people learn it and we start off on the easy stuff, and then we have a plan, a follow-up, 12-month, a monthly follow-up for 12 months, and can become real for them. Uh, quick review of the model: 7 performance areas. So you have the mental, physical, spiritual, emotional. This is on our side. We mastery here to have agents, because if you don't have this, you're not going to be able to do these things. These things involve other people, but before you can lead others, you have to lead yourself. Before you can lead conversations, you have to be able to lead yourself. It's aligned with emotional intelligence, but I would go a step further. Nothing to take away from emotional intelligence, but self-awareness and self-management. That's what we're talking about in December and January, self-management. And then in February, I'll be talking about one-to-one leadership, which is aligned with social awareness and some relationship. I'll be talking about one-to-one leadership, like executive setting, climate, culture, relationship management. So there's alignment there. But what's different between dynamic leadership and emotional intelligence is that we make it all actionable, because we use in the skills and behaviors, and we're not doing this as regular person. We're doing it at the nervous system level, and that comes up here, right? I've got the 7-step reset. This is the battle. This half a second right here is the battle. You have to have the skills. You have to be able to govern yourself. And once you can do those things, you're able to manage this half second much better than you could otherwise. So without this skill and without the ability to master this, your deep practice will still work, but it gets optimized the more you. This is why 10x becomes possible. And it's not, if you can sell 10 widgets, you 100. It's bigger than that. Expanding the scope, expanding your reach, expanding how you're doing it in such a way that X is reasonable based on your design and your plan. And then we have a response, a reaction from the response. So these two together take up a second. And then you have emotional modulation if you need to adjust. And we have action, because we don't want to be action when we're emotionally charged. And then we return to mindfulness and presence. And there's the 3 steps. You can screenshot, but we're going to move a little because I've covered those the last few days. Find old videos or past videos at 7-step reset. That's the digit, 7stepreset.com/. Past videos there. But whatever platform you're watching this on, you can go and watch earlier videos. There's a lot of other content because I clip these to content. So there's going to be content. But if you look for the live events, if you go on like on YouTube and you click on live, you'll see just the live events. So this is what the habit mastery is. We have 7 phases of the stimulus response cycle. So it's not just a half-second stimulus response cycle. And there's levers and drivers in each one of these. And deep practice applies in this area and in this area. This is where cognitive bias come in. It's the first quarter, second, here and here. The pre-listenings, and even you're already pre-programmed based on other things. And when the stimulus happens, your initial detection is colored by that pre-listening and the cognitive biases, meta programs, which are essentially bundling of all that comes into play. And then you have a reaction formation from that. So that reaction time, it doesn't, it encompasses that, what I just now talked about. Meaning your system has already made this, and you're not even aware of it because the conscious mind doesn't come online for a full half second. So meanwhile, the subconscious is off and running with this potentially false narrative of what's needed, right? Because it's based on age 0 to 7 condition, and things are changing so fast. Understand what to do. Give it a year, it's outdated. And then you have the conscious engagement. So that's why deep practice is so important. It's important to be able to change our response, our reaction along these, but it's really important to be able to get what you want. So now this here is a difference between mental rehearsal and practice and deep practice. And you can take a screenshot of that. And so deep practice, rewiring behavior. So certain behaviors they're emotionally charged, they're context specific, and they've been reinforced for years. I mentioned we have a suboptimal model for our quest, our purpose, and the critical insight is that more repetition alone is not going to rewire. Precision and constraint matter more than volume. So deep practice introduces something that gets the system. It's not repetition. It's not practice. I played tennis, racquetball, paddleball, golf, and I used to go and I lived in a city, so we had that wall that we could practice golf in, and you do a lot of repetition. But what we're doing, we're changing at the nervous system level. Repetition is still part of conditioning, just part of conditioning. Intensity is part of conditioning. But when you do deep practice, you're changing the stimulus reaction at those early phases inside that first quarter of a second. We think of as reaction time, which you can't get the conscious mind. You're not going to get there with insights because it's happening even before you're aware. So this is the installation phase. You narrow the target, and this is how to do deep practice. You narrow the target, you isolate the smallest, poor communication, but defensiveness when challenged. So it's getting very specific because remember, there's 100 billion neurons. Each neuron is connected with anywhere from 1,000 to 10,000 other neurons. So you have trillions and trillions of it. So we want to be specific to be targeting that exact thing because remember, neurons are wired together, and you want to get to the core. This is why you do the intensity bursts, deep practice, like 5 minutes at a time, and you'll be mentally exhausted. Then you add some constraints where there's time limits, fewer forced silence, reduced options. So when I'm doing footwork drills and I'm applying to switches, essentially the same, but we use a different model for cognitive processing and interaction we do with physical or athletics. But I add weights to a weighted vest. I add hills. I change the distance of the cones. I change the cones. I come up with different. I just watch YouTube videos for soccer, footwork, and football and drills, and I change the cones and try different. So I'm always adding something different. I also will go live, and that puts some accountability on it. And I do it live from my Facebook group, Facebook page, Transform After 50. This is where we are leaning into that second phase of life after 50, because there's a lot more life effect. Remember the life expectancy tables that were created for insurance. They don't update as the person ages, so they use 0 to whatever, and so all the death are 50. They don't change the life expectancy. If you were and now with artificial intelligence, there's tables out there that you can look for adjusted. But if you look at the adjusted life expectancy at 50, since the person didn't die before, that group has a different life expectancy, and it's more like early 90s. And by the time they get to 90, it'll be more like 100. So it's a lot more life after 50, and that's the point of transformation after 50. And that's how some of this comes together. So how practice, slow execution. This is when you're doing deep practice. Remember, the purpose of deep practice, activating neural pathways and wrapping neurons with myelin, because that makes them fire faster, stronger, more accurately, and they become the path of least. And the path of least resistance is a habit. So you want to slow the execution. It's counterintuitive, but you have to slow it down to where you are not in fear or stress, because the best happens when you're in a growth into mode. So it's when you're in, as you close in, as you converge with from fight or flight, you have less learning going on. You want to keep it wide open. So you go to something that's extremely easy, but then you start progressing. So reliability before speed. First, you want to do it right. Then you want to add speed. This is what you would do with athletics. This is what we did in ranger training. You first do the little piece and you pull the pieces together. Then you have to do the pieces with more speed, and then under testing environment. Then you have to do it at night, and progressing. You want to increase the error density. So in other words, practice where failure is likely. If you're trying to learn a piano piece and the piece is 5 minutes, you don't practice the piece over and over and over. But it's not deep practice. What you would do is take the 20 seconds where you're having trouble and go 5 seconds before, then 5 seconds after that, and then do different things. Change the timing, slow it down, speed. Just do one hand at a time, then do it at a time. Just whatever you use creativity, find what works. That's one of the things we do in the group coaching is we come up with ways to do deep practice. I was talking to a guy who wanted to improve his bowling. I said, well, you have I know how to bowl, but I'm not a bowler, right? And the way this hand would turn to spin the ball. And I said, okay, every time you open a doorknob, I want you to think about that. And then to turn that into deep practice and stand there and turn the doorknob with the precision that you want to have the spinning the ball. That's an example. You can do anything. If you can imagine it, you can do it. That's what's nice about deep practice. But you have to recognize you're not training your conscious side. You're training the network of neurons, which is different. They need that. It's sort of like the 7 factors: novelty, intention, precision, balance, progression, explosiveness, and struggle at the edge of ability. The one that definitely carries over is struggle at the edge of ability and intention, and then precision. So that's what we're talking about here. You also want to practice where confidence is high. We want to put you into stress. That's another thing they do in ranger training. They simulate the training of combat. They want to keep breaking your fight or flight, so you don't have a fight or flight anymore. You have a focus and engage. And then the rule is you miss it, you correct it, re-execute it immediately. This is tapping into the dopamine. So remember, the subconscious network of neurons is processing at 11 million bits per second. Conscious mind processes at 50 bits per second. Part of this process of deep practice, it actually activates more neurotransmitters. So now you have more neurotransmitter, and dopamine is included in that. Dopamine is not just about habit formation, so a signal amplifier. So whatever you're practicing, if you're at it amplifies that signal. You could relate this to hitting plateaus in weightlifting. That's called homeostasis, causes the plateau, but breaking through it with techniques like this creates allostasis, where you build stability, but you build stability upward trajectory, not a horizontal or status quo trajectory. So this is why you want to do it immediately, because now the dopamine is saying, wait, right? You're actually talking to the system the way it learns. Real world testing. This is a stickiness check. So now check it. Use level 2 when the patterns recur under stress, improve, and then regress, or emotionally charged but not catastrophic. So in other words, you want to look at where you're having some challenges and you want the stakes to be up a little higher. So part of what activates neural pathways and part of what activates myelin is the central nervous system interpretation that this thing is really important. So the brain and the central nervous system, I already talked about the pre-listening. They're constantly predicting what is going to come up for me. And whatever that prediction is, the thing that comes up is more difficult it adds more neurotransmitter. The system does. When that thing is less difficult, it starts to pull away neurotransmitter because the brain uses up a quarter of our resting, and that resting metabolism is something like 80% of total metabolism. In other words, exercise and activity is a very small portion, only 20%. Resting metabolism, 80%, and a quarter of that is the brain. So it doesn't use X energy unless it's needed. And by telling the nervous system this is important, that's why allostasis happens. Because if you can do this on a daily basis, doing is you're constantly telling the nervous system that more is coming, get ready, more is coming. This is, in my opinion, what happens with through hikers. Now think about a hiker going from Mexico to Canada. They've got a backpack anywhere from 15 to 30 pounds, and they'll start off doing 7 a day, and they'll end the hike 90 days later. They're doing 30 and 40 miles a day. Why? Because their body has been putting a new demand on it every single day. And over time, that allostasis, that stability on an upward trajectory happens. If you go too fast too soon, you're going to get hurt. You won't do it. So there's a process for this allostasis building, which is beyond the scope of here. But I will be talking about it in leadership development because that same enthusiasm that comes in that first 30 to 60 days of a new employee, you want to capitalize that and have a development plan that continues to incrementally increase what you're asking for them. The same way a through hiker increases over 90 days, we're going to increase that for the employee over 2 years. By that time, they're probably ready to be promoted or slotted into an ideal position. And when they're promoted, you have another 2 year development plan and you keep playing that out. That's what we talk about in the leadership series that'll come in February. So, what we're testing when we do this, does the old default return under pressure? This is important. Does it come back under pressure? If it comes back under pressure, you've got to go back to the deep practice. This is part of the ranger training. And if you can't do it, then you're out. They intentionally look for 55% attrition. And so they are getting, and the same thing with SEALs, they're letting the people go if they can't fix this part of the issue. And it's not that they're bad people. Remember, ranger training was built well before, as well as special ops and martial artists and martial art mastery and things like that, well before we knew about myelin. But they did what worked, and what works is this. And now I can back into it, having done those things, martial arts tournaments, etc. I can look at how that applied and how myelin was actually at play, and I have real examples of it. And then how fast can you recover? When I talk about getting back to a growth mindset in seconds, not minutes, I'm talking about this here. So it's a skill. Outcomes of level 2. What changes? Reduced volatility, faster recovery after mistakes, more consistent behavior under load. I have a view that says because we have a 1 second model, if you can get your recovery down to a sub-second where you're recovering as soon as you notice, you basically have continuous regulation. That's the point of step 2 in the 7-step reset. Step 2 is continuous regulation because your recovery is so fast that the dips are never even noticed. The world of the speed of life is that 11 million bits per second. The speed of what people see is at the 50 bits per second. We're changing things at the speed of life, which is why deep practice is so powerful because you're always ahead of the game. The key signal errors may still happen, collapse no longer does. So, it's okay. This is why it's important to have this understanding to engage in iterative development and iterative refinement. One of the challenges I have, especially with type A people, they don't want to do the iterative development because they don't like failing. And it's very difficult for them. And then deep practice rewiring behavior. Why certain behaviors don't change. They're emotionally charged, they're context specific, and they've been reinforced for years. This leads to the suboptimal model in the context of your quest, purpose, or the changing landscape. And then we have critical insight. More repetition alone doesn't rewire them. It's what I've been saying. Precision and constraint matter more than volume. Level 2 is where we mentally rehearse the failure, then use real life to see what actually stuck. And you just do that. And I would tell you from footwork drills, I would start with a brand new footwork drill that I'm so awkward, but give it a few iterations and I'm doing it like I've been doing it for a long time. And here's what's really cool. The more you do deep practice, the easier it becomes. The more you do deep practice, the better the results you get from it. The more you do deep practice, the faster it comes in to where it becomes automatic. And that's just how you live. I think that's what happens with through hikers. So this is You can take a screenshot of this. It's what I was talking about when I was on the pad. I'll take my image off of it, take a screenshot of that, because this is what we're dealing with, and breaking through this barrier is what's hard. And then what I was saying is we have I go live every day, Monday to Friday. Friday I had it on LinkedIn. The other days I'm on Facebook. You can go to 7stepreset.com/live. It's at the bottom left there. 7stepreset.com/live, and you'll find information. I put the next live event there, as well as the most recent video, and then the workshop, February 12th, 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. You can go to the website 7steptransformation.com/self-mastery-2. And I'll put that link in the comments for this video. And we'll have learning exercises. And you can also get optional one-on-one coaching to make your quest a plan. This is for people who are far enough along in what they want to do, and we can build a blueprint for them. And that's included with that price that you pay for that optional coaching. So the 4 pillars of self-mastery. We're going to cover all 4 pillars. We'll do some practice with deep practice. We'll do the knowledge piece. We'll do the habit mastery, the state mastery, and a smaller exercise on forgiveness, because that's more about teaching you the skills, and then you do that on your own. And then we'll spend some time on deep practice specifically for your quest, because the whole thing is working on your particular quest. So that is the deep practice in a nutshell. I can go on and on. So tomorrow I'll spend a little bit of time on a different kind of mental rehearsal, mainly how to change habits and idiosyncrasies, and also how to use visualization when you're designing into the field of infinite possibilities. So when you visualize, it's usually you're visualizing something that you've done before. But if you're visualizing something that you've never done before, which is sort of the situation we're in, because using this example, we have a world that we don't know what it's going to look like. So if you're in business and you're thinking about what am I going to make my business, you don't really know. But what you do have to do is, 1, accept that it's going to be hard, and 2, that you will prevail. And then you have a model of the world, a backdrop that you think is going to happen, and you build something that's aligned with your passion and your purpose. This is the model. This is the sub-optimizing your model for whatever comes at you. You're inside your passion and purpose. So no matter what happens inside that cone of passion and purpose, there's a new opportunity for you. But you have to be willing to lean into it. And that's the objective of that workshop, self-mastery. And the self-mastery workshop is, let's do this. The self-mastery workshop is it's not going to work that way. There we go. The self-mastery workshop is the foundation and fundamental for dynamic leadership, because if you don't have self-mastery, you can so easily get knocked off course. And how are you going to read another person at the 11 million bits per second level when you have to decide in a moment, in an instant, whether or not to proceed or pull back? Because you proceed if they're regulated, you pull back if they're dysregulated, because making the point, if they're dysregulated, you might as well do something else, because it's not going to get through. And if the person is not regulated and they stay in dysregulation too long, next thing you know, you have what can amount to a phobia type response. So that's the workshop, February 12th. And again, I'll be going live all through February on one-to-one leadership, and that would be for a person leading teams. And then in March, I'll do one-to-many, setting the climate. And we'll use real things that you can do in leaders, real tools, techniques, principles. We'll visit some of the things from good to great, great by choice, and multipliers, but we'll be applying them with practical tools and tips and exercises that you can do. And by the way, I don't use hacks. Hacks fail because of homeostasis. The body, the 11 million bits per second,